presentation from Gretchen today, and then I'm going to turn it over to her introduction and her presentation. So the Women in Networking Committee is a group of members from a diverse selection of member segments. And we meet either every month or every other month. It's been a little erratic lately, as you can imagine. But one of our meetings was right around the time of the George Floyd murder and the protests. And we really felt like we wanted to present a conversation to the membership about ways we could better understand how we could help this matter in our everyday lives, and that we might possibly be doing a lot of things wrong in our workplaces. And so a subcommittee went out and brainstormed and came up with suggestions, and one of the people that kept coming up as a highly recommended speaker, and people who had seen her said, we have to have her on to lead us in this discussion. And so that was Gretchen Cook Anderson, and we're so thrilled to have her here today to guide this conversation. Just a quick thank you to the sponsors that make this possible, all of the programming, and have really stood by through these past few months for the Chamber to help us do everything we're doing. And that's the Village Bank, that's LaSalle University, One Wingate Way, and The Street. So thank you. Also, I saw the list today, so many of our members and some new faces. If you'd like to learn more about becoming involved in the Chamber, I'm always available to chat with you. So I'm going to turn it over to Chiquita Rice. She's a Women in Networking Committee member, and she's going to do the introduction. Thank you again so much. If you have questions, please submit them through the Q&A. And we will be having quite some time at the end for Gretchen to address your individual questions. You're more than welcome to chat if you'd like on the chat conversation, if you just want to throw some ideas out there. But for any of your questions you'd like Gretchen to address, please put them through the Q&A. Thanks again. Chiquita?
Good morning, everyone. I am excited about today's program, and I have an absolute pleasure to introduce Gretchen Cook Anderson. Gretchen is a marketing executive with more than 25 years of experience. She is an engaged member of Needham, where she resides with her family. She also serves on several boards in the area. Gretchen cares deeply about social justice and is passionate about diversity and inclusion. She speaks regularly on these topics, both nationally and locally. Gretchen is thrilled to have just completed Harvard Business School's executive education program, Leading Difference for Performance, where she was alongside 75 of the world's premier organizational leaders across various industries. Please welcome Gretchen.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I want to just thank the Newton Needham Chamber of Commerce in general. Thank you for having me and for this such a thoughtful invitation. And I also really appreciate, personally appreciate the effort that you're putting out to, really grow and on an inclusive level as an organization and on behalf of the members, all the business owners and local business leaders in the community. So, and I would be remiss not to thank Chiquita Rice for reaching out to me originally and talking all of this through. And I have to say, Chiquita, it was really you that convinced me that this was a good thing to do. And I actually have grown to really love the Needham community where I happen to live. Have made so many wonderful friends and have had the honor of patronizing so many of the businesses in the town, as well as Newton. I go into Newton as well. And and I also want to thank Lise Elcock and Catherine Herrer as well for today's opportunity to talk with you all. And just as an interesting point, I just, and I think he actually might be on this workshop, but the owner of the Needham Closet Exchange. I wanted to actually kind of just give a shameless plug for the Closet Exchange, because I happen to be wearing one of their dresses and 2 necklaces that happen to be from that particular local business. So I did want to give them some kudos for that. I am a regular patron of that particular business. So shall we get going, folks? I am going, because I know we just have an hour together today. So what I want to do is share my screen so we can get ourselves started. And please do share whatever questions and comments that you may have. I'm also going to invite suggestions from you as well. If I hit any areas that you know a lot about and you have resources and links and information that you can share with your colleagues today, by all means, please do so in the chat. Let's make sure that we're sharing information and resources that are related to these topics, okay? So, the Inclusivist Life, Championing Inclusion in Networking and Business. So this was, again, a topic that, you know, as Chiquita and I were talking through what might be most value to the Needham-Newton Chamber of Commerce, we were just sort of kind of thinking that through. You know, there's a lot that can be discussed. I mean, there are whole university courses that are hosted for a full semester on topics like this. But since we only have an hour together, I chose to kind of concentrate on two very specific areas, and we'll get to those in just a moment. So that, you know, we'll sort of concentrate there, but there's lots of other learning to do. There are lots of other resources. I shared a few in advance. I hope that you had an opportunity to consume a few of those. But there are lots and lots of resources out there, videos, readings, books, for those of you who are interested in delving deeper. Okay, so again, I'm Gretchen, and I hope I'm here to inform you and encourage you today. I put a little picture of my family there. We live in town near DeFazio Park. We have been in Needham for 6 years. We're originally from the Washington, D.C. area. We moved up here so that my husband could take a career role as he's a public school superintendent in New Bedford. And so that's his work. And then I work from my home office, and at least pre-COVID, travel extensively, both nationally and internationally for my job. So that's a little bit about me. We have 3 kids, as you can see there. We have twin boys who are college sophomores this year. And we have a daughter who is a sophomore at Dana Hall School. So some of you may be familiar. And our boys graduated from Belmont Hill School, for those of you who are familiar with those 2 schools. Okay, so let us go. So I thought I would start off by just sharing kind of my fundamental approach as a presenter on topics around diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism in general. This is kind of my approach. So I'm kind of a follower of Brené Brown and her work around vulnerability. I think she's really brilliant as a researcher and writer. And I kind of just love her vibe in general. So if you're not familiar with Brené, some of the things that she talks about when we're really trying to empower people to take new steps or take next steps when it comes to their desire to want to be more inclusive and to take action around that. You know, this is kind of my approach. She talks about some of these things, and they just really fit in and resonate with me. I'm not here to be right. I'm here to get it right. So I want, and hopefully you all can adopt these kind of attitudes and perspectives and standpoints as well as we're moving through this particular workshop, and as you're thinking about things that you can do in the future with your business or in the community in general. I'm not here to be right. I'm here to get it right, right? And shame is not a social justice tool. I believe in empowerment. I believe in personal empowerment for myself. I believe in empowerment in general for friends, family, my community, businesses in the area, young people. And so, you know, I believe in doing that, you know, kind of making people feel bad can actually be a detractor from encouraging them to take action. And so I'm really on the side of shame is not a social justice tool, because I want you to be in the right mindset to listen actively, to take in information, to process that information, and then to figure out where you fit within that and the actions that you have the ability to take in your sphere of influence, okay? I believe that courage requires uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. Uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. Very important when it comes to courage of any kind across any realm in our lives. I also believe that healthy striving is the ideal, Perfectionism is driven, a lot of us are perfectionists, right? I mean, I think for a long time, I kind of had that I was kind of had that mindset as well. For many years, especially when I was younger, I was very much kind of a perfectionist. I wanted to always do everything exactly right. And then I took a step back from that, and I realized, it's really more so about striving to be better, not necessarily a focus on perfection. And I think sometimes a focus on perfection can hold some of us back in trying new things and extending ourselves out there, in areas of perhaps that may not be as comfortable as perhaps where we are right now. And so I think healthy striving is more the ideal. Striving, though, is imperfect by nature. Striving is imperfect by the fact of what it is, right? But it means that we're reaching, we're stretching, we're really trying to be better in all aspects of our lives. And so I ask that we be okay with that, right? I've learned how to be okay with that. I hope that some of you too can be okay with that. So I want you to also ask yourself, as we're moving forward, what drew you this morning to a conversation on this particular topic? Sit with that for just a moment. What drew you this morning to a conversation on this particular topic? What are you hoping to get from it? What are you hoping to do in the future with regard to your business, assisting other businesses, for example, working with people across difference within your workplace? What drew you this morning? I'm also a big believer. I kind of pull quotes and things that for me are very inspiring, that help me to stay centered on the work that I do for others, both in the community and in my job every day. And so the Talmud had tips for me, what I think is some wise advice. It's not upon you to finish the task of perfecting the world. This goes back to that perfectionism again. But neither are you free to do nothing. This really sits with me and resonates with me a lot, because I really do believe that it's up to all of us to make change, not just one person or this person over here, but it really is up to all of us if we really want to see change, no matter what that change is. But it really is up to all of us to be contributors to it. Okay, so inclusivist. What is an inclusivist? What is this word that's in the title of this particular session? And so first let me define it, and then I'll give you a little bit of background. So inclusivist. An inclusivist believes there's inherent value in inclusion for everyone, and actively and intentionally fosters a sense of community and workplace that welcomes, includes, and is responsive to people of all backgrounds, right? And you'll see down there at the bottom, inclusivist is essentially a term that combines inclusive and activist, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean activist only from the perspective of someone who's out at a rally with a sign, but it means an activist, a person who is action-oriented toward making change, whatever that might look like and wherever that may be, all right? So inclusive plus activist equals inclusivist. And I have to tell you, it's actually a term that I made up. I do a lot of presentations on inclusion across different industries, different areas, higher education, business, and in other areas. And so I really sat with this a few years ago, and I thought, there's got to be a way to describe who I feel I am and what I feel that I do. And so, this sort of came to mind. I thought, well, I don't think that's an actual word yet, but maybe it'll be a word. I'll use it and, hopefully kind of spread the notion of an inclusivist for those of us who really feel strongly about this kind of work across the various aspects of our lives. Okay. Now, when it comes to inclusive business environments can really only exist, and thrive when leaders like ourselves, entrepreneurs and leaders are really dedicated to seeing, hearing, and supporting everyone within that space. And that's seeing, hearing, and supporting everyone, right? Whether that's clients, customers, vendors, suppliers, employees, industry peers, everyone, right? And there's a certain reflex that will kick in for you if it hasn't already, when you practice these things, just like anything, right? You know, we all know that term that we learned when we were kids, practice makes perfect. I like to think practice doesn't necessarily make perfect, but practice makes better, right? And sometimes what we do, the more we practice something, it becomes more natural to us as just an instinct or a reflex. And so being inclusive is no different. Being inclusive is no different. It takes practice. You do it over and over again, and it becomes part of your mindset, and it becomes a natural thing, right? And so inclusive business environments can really only thrive as more of us kind of adopt this way of being and act on this way of being. So what's driving more attention to diversity and inclusion in business environments these days? This seems to be sort of a trending thing, right? That I think, and this goes even when you think about before what happened back in May with the murder of George Floyd and all of the attention around not only racial justice when it comes to the United States, but racial justice on a global scale. So even dating back prior to this year's occurrences and horrific incidents that have led to where we are right now, attention around diversity and inclusion in business environments had already taken hold. Okay, so it's not new, but it certainly is getting a lot more kind of renewed attention this year, which I think is phenomenal. I hate the fact, and I'll be honest, I hate the fact that it took the murder of someone to spur where we are now with regard to all of the attention and the activism and the action that we are seeing across the landscape of business right now. But it's nice to know that there perhaps can be a silver lining to tragedy like this, and hopefully there will be not just incremental change, but vast change because of it. So the global business environment has really heightened employee sensitivity to diversity and inclusion. There's a need for diversity and inclusion as an important component of work. I think a lot of us are hearing and seeing a lot of that in our workplaces, and in a growing body of research that started years and years ago. But there's a increasing body of research that indicates that diverse and inclusive teams outperform their peers. There's been work done by organizations from Harvard Business School to Deloitte to, there are a number of different organizations out there that have done research on this. You can find it by simply Googling. I think Harvard Business Review has actually done some stories about some of this research as well. And then the topic of equality and gender pay equity has really received mounting public attention. So again, refocusing us on diversity and inclusion. And then when we think about career trajectories and a lot of the change we're experiencing around that, issues around age and life transitions are becoming more important. And this too is part of the conversations and the actions around diversity and inclusion when it comes to business. And so this was based on a study that Deloitte did called Diversity, Inclusion, the Reality Gap. But, I think many of us, when we really think about it, we're hearing, we're seeing, we're experiencing a lot of exactly what's here on this slide from Deloitte's study. Now, first, I wanted to also talk very briefly about Boston as a case study. So as I mentioned, I came here from the Washington, D.C. area that has a huge host of businesses that are owned by people of color, persons with disabilities. The Washington, D.C. area really is just it's a very, very inclusive area. I think I've learned that even more. That's really resonated with me even more after having left the area. So it really is underscored for me that, how inclusive that area really seems to be with regard to the power structure, kind of the elected leadership and so forth. And so I thought I was, thinking about Boston, because we are obviously here in the Boston area, and in the western suburbs in particular. And I think many of you kind of may be already familiar with this, but there is sort of a reputational dilemma that at least historically over probably the last 30, 40 years has really kept a lot of professionals of color in particular from relocating to the Boston area, even sometimes when offered really amazing opportunities. And I think it's because there's some reputation issue here in Boston. I think some of it is deserved. Some of it may be perception from the past, from the kind of the busing situation back in the, what was this, the 70s and 80s. And that still sits with a lot of people. It's still in their minds around the country, even now, when they think of opportunities in the Boston area that they could pursue and probably would really benefit from and enjoy. And so I just wanted to raise this just a little bit, because when it comes to the numbers of professionals of color and Black-owned businesses, not only Black-owned businesses, but businesses owned by professionals of color in general, you may not find the volume here in the Boston area that you may find in other large metropolitan areas like Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, Houston, and so forth. And there's some historic reasons behind some of that. And then there's some things that have happened right here in Boston, truthfully, that we have the ability to change. You, me, we have the ability to change, so that there's a difference between then and now when it comes to business owners and professionals of color, and then professionals and business owners of other diverse identities as well. There are ways that we can spur more of that business, that we can support more of that business, and we can also hire more of those professionals in our own businesses in the area. So I took this little quote from the Boston Globe: "Look in the mirror, and that means us." And that's from the Spotlight series that they did in 2017 on race in Boston. I would imagine that many of you probably consumed that series. It really was quite in-depth and quite interesting. Okay. I also wanted to just mention, before I move on, the picture that you see here was actually just a real picture that was taken at a relatively exclusive professional networking event, where I think there were about 200 people. And I think there were only about 5 professionals of color. And when I say professionals of color, I mean non-white professionals. And so again, a bit indicative of the reality here in the area. How do we overcome these hurdles to build a culture of inclusion in business, not only here in the Newton-Needham area, but across the Boston metropolitan region? And so much of culture, there's a lot that goes into creating a culture where people and businesses can thrive. And one of the things so the 2 areas that we'll focus on for the next few minutes are unconscious bias and microaggressions. But there's some other things here that I just want us to at least be thinking about, right? So how do we overcome all of these hurdles? And how do we really think them through, brainstorm, and then take some action, all of us across the spectrum of business and professional life? How do we do that? How do we get over unconscious bias? How do we get over microaggressions? Historic structural inequities, which I think we can all admit still exist, particularly in business, not only in the for-profit, but even in the nonprofit world and in government. Historic structural inequities, there's a hurdle of demographics. Just what do the demographics in a particular area look like? Homogeneous networks. So when you reflect on the organizations that you belong to, the professional organizations, including the Newton-Needham Chamber of Commerce, when you reflect on organizations like this one, that I know, clearly are trying to make strides and do some extra work around inclusion. But think about the other professional groups that you're part of as well. Who is part of them and why? Really think about that. What are some of the things that you can do to begin to change that? Can you use your voice? Can you use your influence to be able to start changing that? Passive employee hiring and promotion practices, passive inclusive workplace practices. And by passive, I mean, you can have a policy that says that something is a priority for you, but if you're not proactively doing the work and being active within doing that, making that work, making the progress happen, then it's passive, right? Little intentionality on inclusive hiring of diverse vendors, contractors, I'll add suppliers and service providers, okay? And then some folks have a bit of discomfort, or maybe even it's just little awareness of how to connect with more diverse industry networks, because they do exist. They exist here in the Boston area. I can tell you, I'm part of some of them. And then there are others depending on the industry that you are part of. But there are more diverse industry networks that are out there if you are interested in joining and being a part and really contributing. Where are you and your business on this journey? Just a moment of reflection. Are you at the beginning of the journey? Or do you feel that you've already been, really striving and trying to do quite a bit, but you're really just trying to you want to do more? Think about that. Where are you struggling? Are there areas that I've just mentioned where you feel that maybe you could use some advice? Maybe, maybe there's a friend you could reach out to and chat with. Are there other folks within your network who you haven't been reaching out to explore partnerships and possibilities? Okay, unconscious bias. I know that some of us on this who are listening in may have already done some work around this. You may have attended a training, at your company. You as a CEO may have hosted a training on these kinds of things. But in the event that there are some folks, I never like to take things for granted. And so in the event that there are some folks who are not as familiar with these two concepts of unconscious bias and microaggressions, I just wanted to kind of put this out there just so that you know what the definition is, okay? So I'm not going to really speak to it, but I think you have the opportunity to take a look at that. And then there are certain types of unconscious bias. One is affinity bias, and affinity bias is actually one of the things that can sometimes hold us back from being more inclusive when it comes to hiring contractors, service providers, thinking about who our suppliers are and so forth. Because oftentimes we think about the people we know, right? We think about the people we already know and we just sort of connect with them. And, if there's somebody who's a supplier or a service provider, but oftentimes those people look kind of similar to us, right? They'll be kind of similar in background, and perhaps they went to the same college that you went to and things like that. And sometimes that can hold us back from being more inclusive. And so I want you to think about an affinity bias in particular. But there are some different kinds of unconscious bias in addition to that. Again, I'm not going to read off of them for time's sake, but just so that you have that in front of you and you can kind of quickly take a look, okay? And I'm happy to share out a few of these slides as a post-event resource if folks are interested. Now, thinking of unconscious bias, who does your mind see at first when you think of these words, right? These careers, these professions, who does your mind see first? Think about that. Be honest with yourself. A startup founder. Who's the startup founder? What background is he? What race is he? What's his ethnicity? How does he dress? Things like that. Who's a startup founder? Law firm partner, airline pilot. Also think of gender. Let's also think gender as well. A Needham restaurant owner, house cleaner, landscaper, nail salon technician, nurse. Who do our minds think of first? And then ask ourselves why. And then ask ourselves if we are open to broadening that perspective, broadening that image of who we think we see. Okay. A microaggression, this is the other term, which is a slight, a comment or an action that sort of subtly and often unconsciously expresses a prejudiced attitude. For those of you who had a chance to watch the pre-event video on bee stings, I don't know if you had a chance to watch that, but that's kind of like what microaggressions feel like. They feel like little bee stings. And so it's one thing if you get stung one time in your life, right? You get over it, you move on, you might not even have much of a memory of it. But if you're someone who, where bees just seem to be attracted to you, right? For whatever the reason, maybe it's your cologne, your perfume, it's the soap that you use, whatever it might be, right? But those bee stings, if you're somebody who's surrounded by bees and you're constantly getting stung, it begins to feel harmful. It's something that begins to, really bother you. So whether you're a woman in the workplace, whether you're a professional of color, it could be someone whose country of origin may be different, and they get kind of microaggressive things that may be said to them because of that. But everybody out there, no matter who you are, has probably experienced some form of microaggression in your life. Okay. So think about it, even if it was a long time ago for you, think about how it felt though, and if you're someone who lives with that on a regular basis, how that might feel. Okay. I'm going to play this video really quickly. It's only 2 minutes and we're getting close to the end of my formal presentation. We're going to go into some Q&A for those who may have some questions. Okay. So let's see if we can get this to play correctly.
Hi, Joe. Sorry I'm late for the call. I had a perfect morning, had to catch the last set.
You surf?
Yeah, I'm at Ocean Beach pretty much all the time. You?
Totally. We'll have to go when I'm up there next week.
Hey, I'm stoked. Epic.
Sure, 27 to 3 o'clock. Sounds good.
Are you John? Joe? Oh, yeah. Great to meet you. I totally had your picture different in my head.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but, anyways, can I get you a cup of coffee?
Yeah, sure.
My hair looks crazy. It looks like a mess.
I don't believe it. Your hair always looks awesome. I mean, how do you do it? Do you twist it? Do you do it yourself?
Yeah, I twist it myself.
Oh, I mean, do you mind? Oh,
Yeah, actually, I do mind.
oh, sorry.
But I mean, if you're really curious about it, there are like tons of YouTube videos out now about natural hair, so maybe check that out.
There's no way we were gonna make it to that date.
No. I have no idea what they were thinking. What do you do this weekend?
Going to the beach with some buddies.
Dude, sounds great. You've already got quite the tan. Where's your family from?
Here,
Yeah, but before here, where are they from?
still here.
But before that.
A few generations from here.
Cool. Sorry.
Okay. So if you think about it, have you ever experienced any of those scenarios? You saw the gentleman who I believe he thought that when he was on the phone with the other gentleman, I think he thought they were closer in age, for example. And then when he actually saw him, he, didn't respond quite very well when he realized that he was the same person, because in his mind's eye, he had seen this person a different way, and then was trying to recover from the fact that the gentleman was different than he thought, and actually verbalized it. And I have to say that I've experienced that myself. My name is Gretchen Cook Anderson. It says nothing about my race. It says nothing about my ethnicity. If anything, I've had people assume that I was probably a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white woman of German heritage because of my name, and because Gretchen is a very old German name. And then when then they've talked to me on the phone, and again, had a certain image in their heads, and then when I've actually shown up for something over the years, I've had a number of people go, "Oh, you're Gretchen." Yes, I am. And so sometimes I've kind of like put that right back on the other person. I was like, "Oh, you're Mary," so because it's interesting for people to sort of hear the question that they may have just asked of someone else in order to understand how it might have landed. So at any rate, thanks for taking a look at that video, just as a way to sort of reinforce examples of what microaggressions are. So what assumptions of others are holding us back from having them as employees, perhaps, leadership within your organization? I'll even go take a step further. Service providers, partners, business partners, and repeat customers. And how do the things we say to others possibly prohibit expanded business opportunity and a more inclusive workplace? Because I can admit that there have been, I won't name them, of course, but there have been a few businesses that I've, over the 6 years that I've been in the area, that I've attempted to patronize, and where I haven't felt very welcomed, or where someone might have come up to me and said something that didn't land right with me, unfortunately, as a microaggression. And I just sort of turned around and walked out and haven't been back. So these things can affect your business, it can affect your bottom line. So not only are they the right, some of this is, obviously that's the right thing to do and the right kind of person to be. But if you are a business owner, an entrepreneur, or you're a leader, in the leadership position at a business that relies on revenue, these can be things that can stunt growth or that can impact your revenue. So you want to think, think about it from a business perspective as well, just hard line business perspective, that these can be things that can hurt. And so if you don't want that to happen to your business, you want to make sure that you have an inclusive workplace. If you run a storefront, for example, a store, a retail, you want to make sure that how welcoming are you of people of all backgrounds? Do you speak to some customers very quickly, but maybe not to others, and then ask yourself why that might be, and really think about that, okay? Turning microaggressions on their head, if you do so, that might assist you in communicating more inclusively. If you think about how would it feel if someone else were to ask you a question that you might have asked of them, when you think about how it might land with you, if the same question or the same comment were made either about you or to you, how would it feel? And if it feels sort of icky, even in the least, then you can probably imagine how it probably would have landed with the other person. So I'll give you another example, quick example before we move to some Q&A. When my family first moved here, and it actually still happens on occasion now, but when my family first moved to Needham, we would get the question a lot. I would get it directly from others. So why did you and your family choose to move to Needham? And I knew inherently what was wrapped up in that question. I understand. And so what I would do is, I would answer the question, then I would turn it around on that same person. So why did you and your family choose to move to Needham? Because I knew where it was coming from. And there are a few people who actually elaborated with their question and said, I guess I would just think that if you are, a Black family, I would wonder, would you feel comfortable living in a community that is so overwhelmingly, made up of a white resident base? Would you want to do that? But, my family would want to live in Needham for the same reasons that any other family would want to live in Needham. If you think of, schools and, really wonderful, safe, family-friendly environment and such, same kinds of reasons that any family would want to live in Needham or want to move here despite the demographics. And so just something to think about, right? Just something to think about. And this is a great way to sort of evaluate yourself when you're thinking about how you might interact with others, okay? And this can also happen with anybody. So even for professionals of color, even for people of color in general, we're not necessarily immune to being saying or doing things that might be microaggressive against towards someone else. So it can still happen. And so no matter who we are. So I think we all have to just be really mindful of how we're communicating and how it might affect our business. So how do I confidently become an inclusivist in business? So this is a checklist. So this is one of those things that if being inclusive is not a reflex for you already, if your mind doesn't automatically just sort of tick things off as it stands right now, am I being inclusive? If you're looking across the scope of your business, if you're not already practicing a lot of this, and if it's not already very intuitive and reflexive, then sometimes you have to fake it until you make it, which is the way that I think about it. And I think that is totally okay, right? If necessary, even if you have to keep a little checklist to yourself that you kind of think about every once in a while and you go, okay, am I doing this? Am I doing that? How am I doing this? How am I getting better at that? then go for it, right? We do what we need to do. So how might I hire and promote with a keen eye on diversity? Should I be shaking up my pipeline to hiring? And so there's a whole set of questions here that I would hope that you would ask yourself. If you're a large organization, whether it's a nonprofit or a for-profit, what does your board look like? What does the power structure look like within your organization? Is it homogeneous? Is it heterogeneous? And across what realms of identity, right? So really think about that. Do I receive enough feedback from customers and clients of color and of other identities to know that I'm getting it right? That I'm in a truly inclusive business. How well do I engage customers who may identify differently from me? That was something I mentioned a few minutes ago. And if I were either a shopper of color or a customer of color or other diverse identity, would I patronize my business? Why or why not? Just some questions to think about, okay? And are you inclusively investing in the future? So this is like a brand new accelerator. I think the students, I want to say they're from Boston University. But is a group of students who got together and created an accelerator called Envision. And Envision is now supported by Amazon and a bunch of other companies. But these students are right here in the Boston area. So if you're interested, if you're perhaps, maybe you're an investor and you really are interested in investing in the future and you want to be inclusive in doing so. There are a lot of really amazingly talented startup founders out there, young people, people who might be, might not be young people, who might be my age, in their early 50s, but who have really amazing, innovative ideas, things that they're in creation mode, where having really wonderful supportive investors can really make a difference for them and their businesses. And then not only that, when they do well, as you know, it helps your business. New ways of stretching and changing to be more inclusive can add complexity to order and comfort, as you probably know. But if you're an entrepreneur, you've already chosen complexity. If you're a business leader, you've already chosen complexity by the very nature of the work that you do. So what else could be holding you back? Sometimes I like to think it's just a little fear, just a little nervousness, a little anxiety, a little fear. That you may fear that you're not necessary, capable, or ready to do so. But I like to think, this is my argument. I like to think that, we each have to see ourselves as necessary to and capable of making inclusive change in ways that we can see the impact and be further inspired by that impact. And I think we're all ready now, like right now, today. Like right after this event is over, that you're going to be thinking constructively about things that you can do, and then you're going to do them. How about that? We're not going to dwell on it too much. We're not going to overthink it. We're not going to second guess ourselves. We're going to act, right? Because that's how things happen. And I think for those of you who are entrepreneurs and business leaders, you know that, right? Because you're already acting on things now. And I like to think that it's kind of, if we do these things, we're kind of like the way Maggie was, right? And so this is a shameless plug for the Closet Exchange. They didn't pay me for this, I swear. But, this woman who unfortunately, the late Maggie, but when I first moved to Needham 6 years ago, I walked through the town center. I went into a few shops and things like that. Some of them I kind of felt like, there was a lukewarm welcome. But when I walked into the Closet Exchange, between the smile and the twinkle in the eyes and the warmth that I felt, I immediately knew that this was a business that was highly welcoming of me and of others. And so I've continued to patronize them because of the fact that when I walk in there, I feel like I'm getting a warm hug. And I think that others feel that way too when they happen to patronize that business. There's a friendliness and a warmth. And I think that no matter who you are, you'll feel that. And so that's what I want us to think about when we think about the kind of business, the kind of workplace environment that we want to create that is going to attract the kind of diversity that we want, and that we're then going to make sure that that's the most inclusive workplace and environment or business that we can possibly have. And if we do that, we're exercising our superpowers, right? I like to think that the capabilities that we practice especially when they really become a reflex for us, that's like a power that we have. It's a superpower that we have as business owners and as business leaders. And so I just like to say, hey, let's all make it happen. Okay, let's exercise our superpowers, not only for our sakes, but for the sake of others as well. Let's be as expansive and inclusive as possible. So at this point, I want to take a few questions. And I am going to, I don't know if I should, ladies, maybe Lise can let me know.
I'm back. I'm back.
Should I get out of sharing my screen, or should I just keep this up here like this and we just move on to some questions?
Let's leave that up there for a while. It's pretty inspirational. If we run into technical problems, I'll get a little nudge to take that down.
Okay, sounds good to me.
Okay, great. So we do have a couple really good questions, starting off with, and Gretchen, great. I learned so much. Thank you so much for your presentation today. Just
Thank you.
Really simple and tangible and a lot to think about and take away. Okay, so first question, it says, you talked in the beginning about accepting that it's hard to achieve perfection. How do you apologize, or what do you do if you find yourself committing a microaggression?
Yes, thank you. That's a really good question. I think that, honestly, if you catch yourself, I think it's perfectly appropriate to apologize. I think, we're all, I like to consider myself a lifelong learner. I'm someone who I feel that even at the age, I'm 51 years old. I like to think that at the age of 51, I am still learning and growing as a human being. And I will be learning and growing until I stop breathing, right? I'm going to be trying to improve myself and be a better person my whole life, however many more years that is, right? And so I also understand that, because I'm not perfect, because none of us are, by the very fact that we're humans and humans are fallible, I like to think that, hopefully others can be forgiving if I make a mistake and I apologize for it. And I let them know that I've learned something from what just happened. And it'll be my goal to make sure it doesn't happen again. And so I think that that's a really good approach when you catch yourself. I'm going to give you an example of that, something that I just did about 2 weeks ago, right? And so again, I go back to, no matter who you are, committing a microaggression is always something that can happen. It is unintentional by the very nature of what a microaggression is. It's generally unintentional. I was picking up, in fact, this was in Needham. I was at the Pearl Vision, which is a Newton business. And I was picking up some contact lenses, and then there was another woman waiting with me to pick up some glasses that she had ordered, and she had on medical scrubs. And as she and I were chatting while we waited, I happened to look at her and I said, are you a nurse? And she said, no, I'm a surgeon. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm so sorry. I said, and not that there's anything wrong with somebody being a nurse, right? That's totally an amazing profession. So it has nothing to do with that. But I had to ask myself, had she been a man in those same scrubs, would the automatic thing I would have asked her, would I have asked her? Would I have asked a man, would I have asked him then, are you a nurse or are you a doctor? And so as soon as she said it, in my mind, I was like, oh, for goodness sake. And I said, well, of course you're a doctor. Of course you're a doctor. And I told her, I said, of course I should have known you're a doctor. I was like, and I said, I'm sorry. I said, of course I should have known that. And she goes, oh, it's fine. She's like, it happens to me all the time. She's like, don't worry about it. But that was a microaggression. The fact that I assumed, and it wasn't that I assumed she was a nurse. I guess I'm not familiar with the different kinds of scrubs people wear. And so I think I just kind of, for whatever reason, I thought that those were nursing scrubs, or if there's such a thing. I don't even know if there's such a thing. And so I just kind of assumed that, oh, those are nursing scrubs, and so she's a nurse, I guess it. So, but that was ultimately, it was a microaggression, right? Whether she felt it that way, whether she registered it that way, ultimately, I don't know. But I caught myself, and I know now, if I'm in that same scenario again, I'm going to automatically go, are you a doctor? So I'm going to fix it myself, right? And then if the person says I'm a nurse, then it's like, oh, okay, great. That's fantastic. So at any rate, I hope that helps.
Yes. Good. Okay. Next question. Not sure how long it's been that you moved from DC to the Boston area, but how would you compare the difference in your experience between the two cities? And I'm not sure at what point of your life, did you have a career back then? We're not sure how your experience, what it entailed in both places.
Huge difference. I may have spoken to a little bit of it earlier, but I think people of color, especially Black people in particular, and that would be Black people coming from all ethnicities, whether they're, from the families are from the Caribbean, from Africa, families have been here in the United States for generations and generations, like my own, wherever they may be from. But I think Black people in general are better positioned in the Washington, D.C. area to thrive professionally. And I say that after having been someone, in that environment, in the professional environment there. I think a big piece of that has to do with the fact that Black people and other people of color are much more part of the power structure in the Washington, D.C. area. People are sprinkled all over, just about every field at different levels within companies and organizations where, people are, have influence over who gets hired, over promoting folks and things like that. And so I think when you're in an environment like that, as a professional, you have much more of an ability to thrive no matter who you are, to be elevated when, you're a talented person who works hard, to achieve, based on your expectations. If you're someone who's an entrepreneur, you have the ability to have an inclusive investment base. If you need investors, to also an inclusive customer base, if you're a customer-based organization. So I think that, you also just have a higher volume of Black working professionals, other professionals of color in that area, just a larger population in general. And so, but I think the degree of inclusion in that area overall, just historically, has been greater. And and there's studies that have been done on this about Boston, about the Boston area.
Sure.
What the area in general has been lacking in that. And so we've definitely got a ways to go in the Boston area. But what I love and what I hope everyone will take away from today is that there's huge potential, huge, or as some people say, huge potential, right? In this area for things to be better for people who look like myself, but also for all of us to just have more inclusive businesses across the board. There's a lot of potential there. So let's exercise it and make it happen.
We have at least two more questions. One of them segues beautifully with that. What is the one thing we could all leave today and do? And conversely, what is maybe one thing that we could just stop doing today?
Stop microaggressions. Stop.
So that entails more thinking before you speak? Okay.
Yeah, I honestly, sometimes it just means pause before you speak. Just pause. Like especially if you're engaging with someone across difference, no matter what kind of difference we're talking about, sometimes it just means take a beat, take a beat, think to yourself, how, there's this curiosity I have about this person, and I really want to ask this question. But is it appropriate? Like, would it be a question that will land well with this individual, where they're going to come away having a positive impression of me? Think about that. And especially if you're a business owner, will it affect the impression they'll have about my business? Because that could be hurtful for your business, right? Because word of mouth is powerful, as we know. And I'll tell you, there have been a couple businesses, like I said, they will remain nameless, but there have been a couple of businesses that I've patronized over the years here in the area that I didn't have a positive experience. And guess what I did? I went and told friends, I didn't really care for my experience there. And so that can actually be harmful to your business, your bottom line. So you just want to, you know, take a beat. That's all I would suggest there. And then with regard to what can people do leaving today, I say just really evaluate your workplace, evaluate your business. So if you're a business owner, I'd say take this weekend, for example, depending on, you know, when you do business, when you're at your busiest. Take a point when you're maybe not at your busiest. I don't know if that's the weekend, if it's during the week, when it depends on the nature of your work. But I'd say just take a moment, sit outside with yourself and really, you know, really kind of think about it and go, you know, how inclusive am I when it comes to suppliers, contractors, vendors, my customer base, my client base? How inclusive am I? And what do I need to do right now to change that if I'm not happy with it? If I'm not happy with my answer, what am I going to do right now to begin to make change around that? What am I going to do? And where am I going to start? And because you can't like just go gangbusters and like, you know, start everywhere, right, at one time necessarily. But where do you feel would be the most important place for you to begin? Is it really looking at your clients? Is it really looking at your suppliers or your contractors that impact your business? Where can you start first where you could probably see some impact and some success and then be inspired by that?
Great. Real quick question, work related. What are resources for finding diverse employees if you live and work in a majority homogenous community?
Great question. Thank you for asking that one. I had a question from a Newton Needham Chamber of Commerce member just yesterday who reached out to me on LinkedIn. I think he was not able to join us today, but he had a question and it was this question. And so, yeah, it was this
is a woman.
It was a question very much like the one that was just asked. And so it was a gentleman, but his question had to do, you know, I think he's involved in the computer science area, computers area, and as a service provider. And he wanted to know, how can I track down more, you know, really talented computer science interns of color? I'm really curious about that. I'd love to be able to do it, but I think I just don't know the network that I need to patch into to make that happen. And so I, you know, recommended to him, there's an organization called Hack.Diversity, which actually trains, it's made up of young people of color. It's based here in Boston, made up of young people of color who are computer science majors, IT and tech folks. And so the whole point of that initiative is to increase diversity in the tech field, tech professionals, tech leadership, startup entrepreneurs, and so forth. And so if that's an area that happens to be your area, you know, reach out to Hack.Diversity. You can Google them. They have a website. Think about the organization that I also just mentioned, I think it was the Boston University students who've created their own accelerator. You know, reach out to them if you're interested in interns or new employees, or you'd like to invest in a startup business, you know, that kind of thing. There are a lot of networks out there that even here in the Boston area that you can patch into that have a diverse professional base if that's what you're interested in. And a lot of it is just as simple as going on Google.
Okay.
You know, and then taking the action of doing your own outreach. And there are Facebook groups as well that you can reach out to. I'd be happy to share some additional resources like that for people who may be interested.
Another question, just kind of dovetailing that, if you're trying to diversify your board, is it okay to go out there saying that you'd like to diversify your board? And
for goodness sake, yes.
Specifically those candidates to, you know, come forward or be
absolutely. Absolutely. And I will use myself as an example. I sit on several boards in the area. One of them is a local organization. I think their CEO might even be on this call. I think he was signed up. But I'm an advisor to the board for North Hill, the senior living community, and very proudly so. And this was an exercise when, you know, when they really wanted to do something about the composition of their board. They wanted to make sure that they were being as inclusive as possible. There were residents who were demanding that. They were demanding it of themselves. And so I actually had some, you know, just outreach. And, someone who knew that I was very active in the community and said, hey, you've been recommended as a potential advisor to the board. And I don't know, would you be interested? And so, or would you be interested in a further conversation about that? And the same thing with other boards that I work on. It really began with a reach out, and a conversation. And for those organizations where I feel like I have a really kind of a personal investment, I have said yes. And I have been very tried to be as active as possible in making a contribution. But for those, there are a lot of very talented professionals of color in this area who would make amazing board members.
Right.
Absolutely. And many are already serving, but there are a lot of other folks too who would be absolutely amazing and make huge contributions to the boards.
Great. And with that, that's the perfect segue to my final comment. This is just the beginning of hopefully attention that the Newton Needham Chamber is going to be bringing around this topic, and we will be releasing, we just closed nominations for the top 50 business people of color that have made an influence in our region, and we're going to assemble a panel, and we will be providing the list. I think we're partnering with the Boston Globe, and we'll be publishing that list sometime in mid to late October. And so this is just not a one-off conversation. We're hoping to continue to bring awareness to those people that are making a difference in the community within diversity and equity. So Gretchen, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation this morning. Thanks, Chiquita, for your help in securing Gretchen today. Gretchen, I hope to see you around. We're doing Needham 100-Day Challenge. If you're eating or drinking or celebrating in Needham Center or anything, take a pic and post it.
Always.
I'm happy to have you as part of the community and the chamber community as well. I understand you're going to be more involved with us, so great.
Yes.
Thank you all for spending the time with us this morning. We so appreciate you zooming in. We know there's a lot of Zoom opportunity out there right now, so thank you so much for choosing us today, and stay safe.
Be well, everyone.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.